8.5 is an Italian film that came out in 1963 that's written and directed by Federico Fellini. So 8.5 is a patron poll winner. It wasn't last week's patron poll winner, but it was the patron poll winner of I feel like almost 3 weeks ago now. I've been extremely behind on not only patron polls, but also $50 patron requests, so bear with me, but this month I plan to be all caught up. But needless to say, 8.5 was a film that, as most patron poll winners, I am extremely excited that it won. Because I've never seen a Fellini film. And Fellini is one of those filmmakers that people say if you love the art of filmmaking, or just want to be a filmmaker in general, you have to watch Fellini and dive into his filmography. And I have heard from quite a bit of people that 8.5 may not be the best place to start because it's considered one of his best films, and honestly one of the best films ever made. It's kind of like somebody trying to get you into Stanley Kubrick and they recommend 2001: A Space Odyssey. But even then, I don't really even think that's a bad strategy, because if you give somebody one of their best films, you kind of hook them in a way that makes it to where it's literally impossible for them not to continue diving into their filmography. And that was what happened with me with 8.5. 8.5 was a film that resonated with me in a lot of different ways, but it's one of those films that I think is going to resonate with anybody who wants to pursue the art of filmmaking. Because as you're watching this film, you can tell that this is an incredibly personal and self-reflective type of film here from Fellini. This is a film that a lot of people consider to be a love letter to cinema, but honestly, for me, it kind of served more as a cautionary tale. Because as I was watching this film, it honestly made me rethink filmmaking as a career. Because in my opinion, it gives an incredibly honest portrayal of the kind of pressures and demands that come with the industry. And it also expresses what it takes to kind of battle these pressures and what it takes to overcome these pressures. And in a way, it kind of expresses the fact that if you want to be a filmmaker and you want to be a director, you basically need to have passion and courage. And if you hit a point in your career where you lack those things, things are not going to end well for you. Because the main character of this film, which is a film director, he's somebody that you've come to see throughout his entire film, lacks the ability and confidence to choose and make certain stern decisions on what he wants to do with this film. He's somebody that I think feels is being suffocated and trapped by not only the industry itself, but also by his own flaws and who he's become as a person and as a filmmaker. And I say trapped and suffocated because to me that's obviously demonstrated by the kind of metaphorical representations that's demonstrated in the beginning dream sequence of this film. But I feel like the central character of this film could be interpreted in different ways. He could be interpreted as somebody who is too weak and spineless to hurt people's feelings and make the correct decisions that will further his art. Or he can be viewed as somebody who simply wants everything and in turn and in result gets nothing. But I can see this film being incredibly therapeutic for Fellini, considering that he probably sees himself, a lot of himself, in this main character in terms of, lessons that he had to learn along the way and flaws that he still sees in himself. And I'm sure this is therapeutic for a lot of filmmakers that are currently in the industry right now, or were in the industry when they watched this film. But I can see how 8.5, and really Fellini's filmography in general, inspiring a multitude of filmmakers. Everybody between Martin Scorsese, who I can see is apparent through all the tracking shots in this film that are honestly quite breathtaking. The directing in this film is quite groundbreaking in a lot of ways, because there are plenty of scenes in this film that are all shot in one take, but not only are they shot in one take, but the direction in terms of what the subjects of the scene are constantly change throughout the scene. And just to see the focus and the subject of the scene constantly change throughout the entirety of the scene as it goes from one person to the other, and the next person to the next, and the next to the next, it's kind of disorienting. But at the same time, it's incredibly impressive stuff. Because you'll have characters that'll kind of pop out of nowhere and become the forefront of the scene. And to see him like smoothly transition between all these different subjects throughout one scene, I just thought was not only impressive, but really created this kind of high energy pace to the film that not only made it more engaging, but I feel like would express the kind of chaotic anxiety that somebody has to deal with being in this Hollywood bubble. But I can also see a filmmaker like Terry Gilliam being inspired by the kind of meta and satirical approach to this film. Because this film is incredibly self-aware. And it kind of reminded me of a recent film that I saw called The Player. Obviously, The Player came 30 years after this film did. But this is a film that in the same way is very aware that it's referencing itself. There are so many different lines of dialogue that occur in this film where it's incredibly obvious that not only are they talking about, the actual world that's presented in the film, but also about the film itself. That, in my opinion, was most cleverly expressed through this critic character in the film. And at first, I didn't think I wasn't going to really like this critic character, because he just came off a bit annoying. But then it quickly becomes obvious that that's the point, and then it just becomes incredibly humorous. And again, like his character, as he's kind of critiquing the main character in this film in terms of, what he's going for with the film, but it also becomes apparent that this critic character serves as a way for Fellini to kind of critique himself, and also is kind of serving as the way he thinks critics are going to view this film. So again, I thought that was, even though this critic character is incredibly pretentious, but I also think his character is arguably an accurate portrayal of how snobby a lot of the critics in Hollywood can be. But again, his character as a whole, I think, was a clever incorporation into the film in terms of expressing the kind of satirical and meta and self-reflexive approach this film has. But also, oddly enough, I saw a little bit of Tarantino in this film as well. There is this one dance scene in the film that occurs, I believe, in the first act. And I immediately thought, okay, there's no way that Tarantino didn't see this film and get the idea for that dance scene in Pulp Fiction. Maybe I'm stretching, but it's quite difficult to watch that scene and not immediately think of Pulp Fiction. But one other thing about this film that I thought was quite artful and creative was that I don't really want to say it's surreal, because to me, like, at least when I use the word surreal, I kind of use it to mean that it's distorting and bending reality in a way that seems both familiar and unfamiliar. I could be wrong with the definition, but that's just usually what I think of when I hear the word surreal. But in this film, it just feels a bit dreamlike. And only until like the third act of this film, it really starts to blur the line between fantasy and reality. Because throughout this film, I think it makes it fairly obvious in terms of how it differentiates between, his fantasies and reality. But once the third act hits, and in terms of like the last 15 minutes, that line definitely starts to get blurred, in a way that I thought was quite effective, because it's also interpretive. And I think people are going to get different things from the ending, in not only a narrative sense, but like in a symbolic and thematic sense. But one thing about this film that I will say, and I might be alone on this, and I wouldn't be surprised if I was, but I do think that this film is just a tad bit too long. I just remember it hitting a point in the second act where I started to become less interested in what was happening with the main character and in the story itself. And I just feel like if some scenes were trimmed up just a little bit, it would have made for a more compact and concise type of story and character piece. And I'm also trying to hold back on my bias a bit, because this film does seem like a film that's like tailor-made for somebody like me who loves the art of filmmaking and wants to pursue filmmaking as a career. So sometimes I try to bracket myself and try to put myself in somebody else's shoes who perhaps doesn't have that same passion for filmmaking that I do in terms of trying to pursue it as a career, and see how they view it as a film. But at the end of the day, I think if you love film as an art form, you're going to get a lot out of this film. So I'm going to give 8.5 a soft 9 out of 10. Yeah, I think this is quite an incredible film. And I can totally see why this is a lot of filmmakers and a lot of film lovers' favorite pieces of filmmaking they've ever seen, and also why it's considered one of the best films ever made. I don't know if I personally go as far to say that this is one of the best films ever made. I'd have to maybe watch it again and reflect more on it, but I can totally see why it is being considered in that category. But obviously, I'm incredibly excited to dive more into Fellini's work. What's the next Fellini film you think I should watch? I am dying to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section, and also about this film in general. But if you really enjoyed what I had to say about 8.5, please give this video a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.